Your TV and gaming console are fighting for control. So why does your TV switch inputs turn on by itself or ignore your remote? Today, I'll show you the hidden HDMI CEC setting causing the chaos and exactly how to turn it off. Like the video and subscribe for honest soundbar reviews that help you buy smarter. Comment. Make sure to tell me what the next video should be about. And check the description for best prices and product links. HDMI CEC was supposed to make your life easier. Imagine pressing one button on your TV remote and having your entire home theater respond exactly the way you want. The TV turns on, your soundbar wakes up, the correct HDMI input appears, and your volume control works without touching another remote. That was the promise of HDMI CEC. But if your TV randomly turns on, your console hijacks the HDMI input, or your soundbar suddenly stops responding, this same feature may be the reason. HDMI CEC stands for Consumer Electronics Control, and it is built into the HDMI connection between your TV, soundbar, AV receiver, game console, streaming device, and other equipment. While the HDMI cable carries your video and audio, CEC provides a separate communication channel that allows these devices to send control commands to each other. In simple terms, CEC is supposed to make your devices behave like one connected system instead of a collection of separate boxes. The idea is actually excellent. You shouldn't need one remote for your TV, another for your soundbar, another for your Blu-ray player, and another for your game console just to watch a movie. With CEC enabled, pressing a button on one device can trigger actions across the entire system. Start a game on your PlayStation, and the TV can automatically wake up and switch to the correct HDMI input. Turn off the TV after watching a movie, and your receiver or soundbar can automatically go into standby. One of the most useful CEC functions is volume control. When your soundbar or AV receiver is connected through HDMI, CEC can allow your TV remote to control the audio system directly. You press volume up, the TV sends the command through HDMI, and the soundbar increases its volume. You don't have to search for another remote every time you want to change the sound. CEC can also handle features such as one-touch play, system standby, and device control. These functions are designed to make the entire entertainment system feel seamless. When everything works correctly, you barely notice the technology in the background. You simply press a button, and everything responds. But here's where the problem begins. HDMI CEC isn't controlled by one company, and manufacturers don't always implement it in exactly the same way. Samsung, LG, Sony, TCL, Hisense, Philips, and other brands can use different names, menus, and behaviors for essentially the same technology. That means two devices can technically support CEC, but still disagree about how certain commands should be handled. And this is why HDMI CEC can go from being incredibly convenient to incredibly frustrating. A game console can turn on your TV when you don't want it to. A streaming device can suddenly change your HDMI input. Your receiver can wake up by itself. Or worse, CEC problems can interfere with the communication your TV uses with your soundbar or AV receiver. So the feature itself isn't necessarily the enemy. The real problem is that your devices have to communicate correctly, and when that communication goes wrong, the symptoms can look completely random. The good news is that once you understand what CEC is actually doing, you can identify which device is causing the problem and decide whether you need to disable CEC completely or simply turn off the specific feature that's creating the chaos. Why HDMI CEC turns into a nightmare? The biggest problem with HDMI CEC isn't the idea itself. The problem is how different manufacturers implement it. HDMI CEC is a standard, but manufacturers have plenty of freedom in how they use it. Samsung, LG, Sony, TCL, Hisense, and other brands can interpret and manage CEC commands differently. Your devices may all claim to support HDMI CEC, yet still behave completely differently when they're connected together. And there is another layer of confusion. You probably won't even find a setting called HDMI CEC on your TV. Manufacturers gave this feature their own names. Samsung calls it AnyNet Plus, LG uses SimpLink, Sony calls it BraviaSync, Philips uses EasyLink, Panasonic uses VeraLink, while TCL and Hisense may use names such as CEC Control or Control Other Devices. So when something goes wrong, the average user may not even realize that these different names are referring to the same technology. This is where the famous phantom power-on problem comes from. You turn your TV off before going to bed, everything appears completely shut down, and then hours later, the screen suddenly turns itself on. You didn't touch the remote. Nobody entered the room. In many cases, one of the connected HDMI devices sent a CEC command that the TV interpreted as a request to wake up. A streaming device performing a background task or a game console checking its connection can sometimes trigger this behavior. Then there's input hijacking. Imagine you're watching Netflix through your TV and suddenly your screen switches to the PlayStation input. You didn't press anything. The reason could be that someone turned on the console and the console sent a CEC command telling the TV essentially, "I'm active, switch to me." The TV follows the command, your movie disappears, and you're left wondering why your television suddenly made its own decision. The same thing can happen in reverse. You may turn on your TV expecting your soundbar or AV receiver to wake up, but nothing happens. Or, your receiver turns on but the TV doesn't switch to the correct input. Sometimes the volume buttons stop working, even though the HDMI cable is perfectly fine. These problems can make you think your equipment is defective, when the actual issue is simply that the devices aren't agreeing on their CEC commands. There is also an important relationship between CEC and ARC or eARC. ARC and eARC are responsible for sending audio from your TV back to your soundbar or AV receiver, while CEC handles control and device communication. They are technically different technologies, but in real-world setups, they often work together. This is why disabling CEC can sometimes affect the way your TV and audio system communicate, especially when you're relying on your TV remote for volume control or automatic power switching. That creates a frustrating situation. You may want to disable CEC because your PlayStation keeps turning on the TV, but turning CEC off completely could also remove the convenient control features you actually want. You could lose automatic power synchronization or the ability to control your soundbar's volume with the TV remote. So, simply telling everyone to turn CEC off isn't always the best solution. The smarter approach is to identify exactly what is causing the problem. If your TV randomly powers on, you may only need to disable automatic power-on behavior. If a console keeps taking control of your HDMI inputs, you may need to disable HDMI device linking on that console. And if everything is fighting with everything else, then completely disabling CEC may be the cleanest solution. Before you start changing random settings, though, you need to know exactly where CEC is hiding on your particular TV and connected devices. That's where things get much easier, because once you know the manufacturer's name for CEC, you can go directly to the right menu instead of searching through every setting on the television. Find a CEC setting on your TV and devices. Now that you understand what HDMI CEC is doing, the next step is finding the setting that controls it. This sounds simple, but manufacturers deliberately give CEC different names, and the menu location can change between TV models and software versions. So don't worry if your screen doesn't literally say HDMI CEC. You're looking for the manufacturer's version of the same feature. If you have a Samsung TV, look for AnyNet Plus. On many recent Samsung models, you can find it by opening Settings, going into General, then External Device Manager, and looking for AnyNet Plus or HDMI CEC. This is the master control for Samsung's CEC system. Depending on your model, you may also find additional options related to automatic device power or control. On LG TVs, the feature is called SimpLink, usually shown as SimpLink HDMI GEC. On many WebOS models, you'll find it inside the General or Devices settings under HDMI-related options. LG may also provide settings such as Auto Power Sync, which can be useful because you don't always need to disable the entire CEC system. If your only problem is the TV turning on or off automatically, disabling the specific power sync function may solve the problem while allowing your TV remote to continue controlling the soundbar. For Sony TVs, you're looking for Bravia Sync. The exact menu path depends on whether you're using an older Android TV or a newer Google TV model, but you'll generally find it under settings related to external inputs, channels and inputs, or device control. Sony TVs can also provide individual options for automatic power behavior, so check those before completely disabling Bravia Sync. TCL TVs require a little more attention because the exact menu depends on whether you have a Roku TV or Google TV. Roku models commonly use a setting called Control Other Devices, or CEC, while Google TV models may use terms such as External Device Control or HDMI Control. Once you're inside that menu, look for options related to one-touch play or system standby. These individual controls can sometimes solve the problem without disabling CEC entirely. On Hisense TVs, the setting is often much easier to identify. Look under System or Connection Settings for something like HDMI CEC, CEC Control, or an HDMI and CEC menu. Depending on the model, you may find separate options for device auto power and TV auto power. Again, these individual controls are worth checking before you shut down the entire system. Vizio generally keeps the name simple and calls the feature CEC. Depending on the model and SmartCast software version, you'll typically find it under System or the broader TV settings. Some models also include device discovery controls, which can be useful if the TV has trouble recognizing your receiver or soundbar. But don't stop with the TV. The device causing the problem may actually be your PlayStation, streaming box, Blu-ray player, or another HDMI-connected product. For example, on a PlayStation 5, HDMI device link can be controlled from the system settings. If the PS5 is repeatedly turning your TV on or switching inputs, disabling that feature can be a much better solution than disabling CEC across your entire home theater. The same principle applies to streaming devices such as Chromecast or Google TV devices. Look for HDMI CEC controls inside the device's display and sound settings. Some devices allow you to disable automatic power behavior while keeping other communication features active. That gives you much more control over exactly what CEC is allowed to do. Here's the important part. Don't assume that disabling CEC on one device automatically disables it everywhere. CEC is a communication system between multiple connected devices, so you need to think about the entire HDMI chain. Your TV, AV receiver or soundbar, game console, and streaming devices can all participate in that conversation. And before you switch everything off, identify the exact symptom you're trying to fix. Is the TV turning itself on? Is the HDMI input changing by itself? Is your soundbar failing to respond to the TV remote? Or is your receiver waking up unexpectedly? Once you know the symptom, you can target the specific CEC function responsible instead of destroying all of the useful automation. That's the key difference between randomly disabling settings and actually fixing the problem. You don't necessarily need to eliminate HDMI CEC. You need to take control of it. And in the next section, we'll look at the 3 strategies you can use, from completely disabling CEC to making a much more targeted adjustment. The 3 ways to take back control of HDMI CEC. Now you know what CEC is and where to find it. The next question is the one that actually matters. What should you do about it? There isn't one solution that works for every home theater. You have 3 practical options, and the right one depends on how badly CEC is misbehaving and which convenience features you still want to keep. The first option is the nuclear approach. Disable CEC completely. If your TV is constantly turning itself on, HDMI inputs are changing without permission, your receiver keeps waking up, or multiple devices are fighting for control, this is the simplest way to stop the chaos. Go into your TV's CEC setting, whether that's AnyNet Plus, SimpLink, Bravia Sync, or another name, and turn the master function off. Once CEC communication is disabled, those devices can no longer send most of those automatic control commands to each other. The downside is obvious. You lose the convenience that made CEC attractive in the first place. Your TV may no longer automatically switch to your PlayStation when you turn it on. Your receiver or soundbar may not power on with the TV, and depending on your setup, your TV remote may no longer control the volume of your sound system. You'll probably need to use separate remotes again. It feels like going backward, but if your system has become completely unpredictable, reliable manual control can be much better than automation that constantly fails. The second option is the surgical approach, and for many people, this is the better solution. Instead of disabling CEC completely, keep the main CEC function enabled and turn off only the specific behavior causing the problem. Your TV may offer options such as Auto Power Sync, TV Auto Power On, Device Auto Power Off, or One Touch Play. If your television randomly turns itself on, for example, Disabling automatic power on may solve the problem while allowing your TV remote to continue controlling the soundbar's volume. This approach gives you the best balance between convenience and stability. You can keep the features you actually use while eliminating the commands that cause trouble. If your console keeps hijacking your TV input, you might disable HDMI device link on the console rather than turning CEC off on the entire TV. If your TV keeps waking up when a streaming device becomes active, target that device instead. The fewer CEC functions you disable, the more of the useful automation you can preserve. The third option is more specialized: a CEC blocking adapter. This is useful when one particular HDMI device is causing problems, but your TV doesn't give you enough control over individual CEC functions. A CEC blocker is designed to stop the CEC communication from passing between that device and the rest of your system while allowing the HDMI connection to continue carrying video and audio. This can be especially useful when you have identified one problematic streaming device or game console. Instead of shutting down CEC across the entire home theater, you isolate the troublesome device. Your TV and soundbar can continue communicating with each other, while the rogue device loses its ability to send unwanted CEC commands. However, there is one important warning here. Don't blindly put a CEC blocker on your ARC or eARC connection. Your soundbar or AV receiver may rely on CEC-related communication for control and proper operation. Blocking that communication can interfere with automatic audio switching, volume control, or other functions. If you're using ARC or eARC, the blocker should generally be considered for the problematic source device, not the cable connecting your TV to your audio system. You also need to be careful when buying an adapter because HDMI is carrying much more than simple control commands. Your system may be running 4K, HDR, Dolby Vision, or even 4K at 120 Hz. A poorly made adapter can introduce its own problems, so don't assume every inexpensive HDMI accessory is equally reliable. The smartest way to approach this is to start with the least destructive solution. If only one device is causing trouble, fix that device first. If your TV gives you individual CEC controls, disable only the problematic power or input function. And if the entire system is completely unstable and you don't care about automatic control, then disable CEC altogether. There is also one important point to remember. ARC and eARC are not the same thing as CEC. You shouldn't automatically assume that turning off CEC will eliminate all audio functionality, but depending on the TV and receiver combination, certain control and handshake features may stop working. If your soundbar or AVR suddenly stops responding after you disable CEC, turn it back on and test the system before assuming the hardware is defective. Ultimately, this isn't about declaring HDMI CEC universally bad. It's about making your system obey your priorities. If convenience matters most, keep the useful functions. If reliability matters more, remove the problematic automation. And if one device is responsible for the chaos, isolate that device instead of punishing every component in your home theater. Once you've made the change, don't immediately assume the problem is solved. Give the system a proper test. Turn everything off, power it back on, switch between your HDMI sources, test the TV's built-in apps, adjust the soundbar or receiver volume, and see whether the unwanted behavior returns. That's how you'll know whether you've actually fixed the CEC problem or simply moved it somewhere else. Test your system and build a more reliable setup. Now that you've changed the CEC settings, this is where you find out whether the fix actually worked. Don't just turn the TV on once and assume everything is fine. HDMI CEC problems often appear when devices change states, switch inputs, or wake from standby. You need to test the exact situations that were causing trouble in the first place. Start with a complete shutdown. Turn off your TV, AV receiver, or soundbar, game consoles, streaming devices, and other HDMI-connected equipment. Leave the system powered down for a moment, then turn the TV back on by itself. Watch what happens. Your audio system should respond according to the CEC behavior you've chosen. If you disabled automatic power synchronization, the soundbar, or receiver, may stay off, and that's expected. The important thing is that nothing unexpected happens. Next, test your HDMI inputs one at a time. Turn on your PlayStation or Xbox and see whether the TV automatically switches to that input. If you've intentionally disabled One-Touch Play or HDMI device link, the TV should no longer be forced onto that source. Then switch back to your streaming device and confirm that the TV doesn't suddenly jump to another HDMI input when another device becomes active. Now, Test your audio system. Open a built-in TV app such as Netflix or YouTube and make sure sound is coming through your soundbar or AV receiver. Adjust the volume with the TV remote. If you kept the necessary CEC functions enabled, the volume should respond normally. If you disabled CEC completely, you may need to use the audio system's own remote. That's not a failure. It's simply the trade-off for removing CEC control. You should also test ARC or eARC if your TV sends audio to your receiver or soundbar through HDMI. Play content from a TV app and confirm that the audio system receives the signal. Then switch to a connected HDMI source and switch back to the TV's internal apps. This is important because some HDMI problems don't appear until you move between different sources. If everything works but your TV still randomly powers on, don't immediately blame the television. Look at every connected HDMI device. Temporarily disconnect one device at a time and test the system again. If the phantom power on disappears after disconnecting a particular console, streaming box, or cable box, you've probably found the source of the unwanted CEC command. The same process works for input switching. If your TV keeps jumping to HDMI 2, disconnect the device connected to HDMI 2 and see whether the behavior stops. This simple isolation technique can save you hours of changing random settings because you're testing the actual source of the command instead of guessing. There is another useful habit that can prevent future headaches. Keep your HDMI system simple. Every additional device connected through HDMI is another potential participant in the CEC conversation. You don't necessarily need to disable every smart feature, but avoid enabling unnecessary automatic control on devices you rarely use. The fewer devices trying to control the system, the easier it is to keep everything predictable. Firmware is also worth checking. If your TV, AV receiver, soundbar, PlayStation, Xbox, or streaming device is running outdated software, update it. HDMI compatibility problems are often addressed through firmware updates, especially when manufacturers discover unusual interactions between different devices. At the same time, remember that an update can occasionally change settings, so after updating, check your CEC configuration again. If your system continues behaving strangely after all of this, perform a proper power cycle. Turn off the equipment, unplug the TV and audio system from the wall, disconnect the HDMI connections if necessary, wait for a short period, and reconnect everything. Then, allow the TV and audio system to establish a fresh connection. This can clear temporary HDMI communication problems that aren't fixed simply by changing a menu setting. And here's one final rule. Change one thing at a time. If you disable CEC, replace the HDMI cable, reset the TV, update the firmware, and change the audio settings all at once, you won't know what actually fixed the problem. Make one adjustment, test it, and then move to the next if necessary. That turns troubleshooting from guesswork into a controlled process. The goal isn't to create the most automated home theater possible. The goal is to create one that behaves exactly the way you expect. If your TV turns on when you want it to, your HDMI inputs stay where you put them, your soundbar or AVR responds correctly, and your TV apps continue sending audio through your system, you've achieved what CEC was supposed to deliver in the first place. Convenience without chaos. And if you discovered that completely disabling CEC made your system dramatically more reliable, that's perfectly fine too. A few extra remote control presses are a small price to pay if your entertainment system finally stops making decisions for you. The final conclusion. After everything we've covered, HDMI CEC isn't really a feature you need to fear. The problem is uncontrolled automation. CEC was designed to make your home theater simpler, but when different devices interpret its commands differently, that convenience can turn into random power-ons, unwanted input switching, receiver wake-ups, and frustrating audio problems. The first thing to remember is that you don't have to disable everything immediately. If your only problem is your TV turning on by itself, look for the individual power sync or one-touch play setting and disable that first. If your PlayStation or another HDMI device keeps taking over the screen, disable its HDMI device link feature. If one particular device is clearly responsible for the chaos, isolate that device rather than disabling CEC across your entire system. If your entire HDMI system has become unpredictable and you simply want reliability, disabling CEC completely is a perfectly reasonable choice. You may lose automatic power control and TV remote volume control, but you'll gain something much more important: predictability. Your TV will stop making decisions based on commands from devices you aren't even using. And if you want to keep CEC but one device refuses to cooperate, a CEC blocking adapter can sometimes provide a more targeted solution.